Welcome to AASHTO Resource Q&A. We're taking time to discuss construction materials testing and inspection with people in the know, from exploring testing problems and solutions to laboratory best practices and quality management. We're covering topics important to you. Now, here's our host, Brian Johnson.
Welcome to AASHTO Resource Q&A. I'm Brian Johnson.
And I'm Kim Swanson. Brian, we have another FAQ episode. We haven't done one in a while, I feel like.
Yeah, I don't think we've done one of just me and you.
Hopefully this is educational for people and that they enjoy this episode. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, we've had a couple questions recently regarding the use of our logo, as well as issues regarding publicizing a company's accreditation. So we've gotten enough of these questions recently where I think it's time for us to address it on an episode of the podcast.
Yes, and we have had separate podcast episodes, I think in season 2 or season 1, and I'll put links in the show notes to those episodes about publicizing your accreditation, and I believe also about false claims of accreditation. And we do have policies on our website about these things specifically that I also will link to in the show notes. But I agree, we've been getting a lot of questions, so I think it's time to dive back in and share some more thoughts on that. So let's deal with the false claims first. What does the AASHTO accreditation program consider a false claim of accreditation?
False claim is any untrue or exaggerated statement that is made about one's accreditation status, whether that be intentional or not. It is still objectively a false claim if we find that that happens.
And then how do we generally discover some of these false claims of accreditation?
That's a tough one because we don't have a regular process for that. Like most of the things we have a regular process for, we perform assessments every so many months. We perform annual reviews once a year. But certain things like false claims and third-party complaints, they happen when they happen. So I'll give you an example. We've had times where we've gotten contacted by people saying that there is somebody claiming to be accredited that is not. Then what happens is we look into it and figure out if we can objectively determine that that is true. If so, we go through the false claims process. Another thing that can happen, and this just happened the other day, is I got a unusually urgent request for accreditation that indicated to me that this person may already be claiming to be accredited when they are not. That is a red flag for me. So, of course, I start looking into it. Okay, well, they seem like they think they're already accredited or may have told somebody that they're already accredited. Let's see if they are overtly claiming to be accredited. So, of course, I look into their website and I find information on it that indicates that they are claiming somehow or obfuscating that they may be having some relationship to accreditation or certification or some relationship that doesn't exist with our program, or it could be a location of their laboratories that they might be implying are accredited through our program, or a standard that they might be implying or stating directly that they're accredited for that they are not accredited for. So there's all kinds of ways that things can be falsified, and none of them are good, obviously, and we need to figure them out. So, all right, so I didn't really answer your question. So I'm going to go back to that. So they can be a third-party complaint, or we can stumble upon them. So like the one I mentioned where my spidey senses were going off, that there might be an issue, and I looked into it. So there's another way. We don't have as part of our annual review process that we review the company's website to make sure that they're not making any false claims. That is not currently part of our process. So it is kind of a spot check kind of thing, but that is our process currently. So it is a process, and people do have due process. So if we look into it and there's no problem, obviously there's no problem. They won't hear from us. They don't even need to know that we got a complaint. But if we look into it and find an issue, then we have to follow up on it.
There is a couple points that I want to break out from our listeners here. There's the implied, right? So it can be totally unintentional that the organization and laboratory is implying that they have more accreditation than they don't. It could also be a terminology issue and I think we see this a lot. I know I see this a lot, and I think we've had episodes about this, and the difference between accreditation and certification. And I think some people don't quite understand that. They'll list on their website and promotional materials that they are AASHTO certified or that they are AASHTO resource certified or CCRL certified. And those aren't correct statements, right? So that would also kind of be a false statement of accreditation because they're not certified. AASHTO accreditation program does not certify individuals. So that is a false claim. So I think there's a couple things about that as well. Like it could be just, I think most of the time we see these or I see this happen is when it's completely unintentional. Perhaps somebody in the marketing department just did their website wrong, or perhaps it was, that they are seeking accreditation. And so they just went ahead and say, yeah, we're accredited. And so they just put the cart before the horse a little bit. But we do have malicious intent sometimes where people are trying to pull one over on other people and say that they're accredited and when they know that they're not. But I think for the most part, it is kind of the unintentional or the ambiguous, implied, general, like, yeah, we work with them. It's like not quite, you can't quite say it like that.
Yeah, I can tell you almost every time I've dealt with this, I get it, whether this is true or not, I get the explanation that the marketing person or the website person didn't understand the terminology or thought they understood what was going on or wasn't aware of the policy. Regardless, they usually fix it within the 7-day period that we have in our policy. They need to take care of it that week. What I run into occasionally is that people say all the right things, but then they don't fix it. And that I can't know the intent, right? I can't know the intent, but it's not a good look. So if somebody is saying all the right things, but in the end they're not willing to make the change, then guess what? That's a false claim, and we're gonna put you on the false claims table or false claims list on our website, which I will also want to talk about how we need to make that a little bit more prominent. We don't get a lot of people on there, a lot of companies on there, but it is important when somebody goes to our directory that they see that that is a thing, so that hopefully they go there first to see if they're dealing with a false claim if they're not sure. There's always that situation where we don't know what's going on unless we find out about it, which sounds obvious, but there could be false claims going on. Somebody could be submitting a bid for a contract and they're claiming to be accredited. We have no idea about any of that stuff. We don't get those documents. We're not aware. So unless somebody reaches out to us and says, hey, this happened and here's the evidence, then we don't have anything to go on. I think like a big challenge is getting people to understand that. We also don't know all the agencies and organizations that require accreditation. So there could be a county or a school board or a business that has requirements for accreditation, and they may get a bid for a contract that includes a homemade certificate, right? They may not even be a customer of ours doing something like that. And unless they go to the directory and look to verify the information, there's no way they would know. So like that's the one thing that we really want people to understand is you have to go and verify it, not only to see that that is legitimate, but also to see if there are suspensions. And if there are suspensions, that should be a problem. A suspension is a temporary situation, but it needs to be resolved. And if you are getting a bunch of bids from companies and some of them are suspended, and they can't give you a good explanation of why that is, or they won't share with you the information about it and what they're doing about it, that should bother you. I can't tell you what to do. It's up to you ultimately if you're the one who doing the hiring, making the hiring decision or contract award decision, but that should bother you.
Yeah, I think we can't overstate how important it is that agencies requiring and specifying accreditation actually verify it because our certificates when somebody prints it out will have the date and time that that accreditation was. So if you get a certificate that is, 10 months old, that's not accurate because nothing may have changed, but that's not a current view of their accreditation because our directory does get updated at least once a day with the current information. So if there's any changes or suspensions, that information is made available publicly relatively quickly. Now, Brian, I have 30 minutes in my head, but has that been changed? How often is the directory updated?
We've had to change it because of different loads on our our web resources. So at times it had been 60 and then it was 30. I think we're back to 30 now. So it's not immediate, but I mean, and just, I mean, within the hour is pretty close to immediate when you're talking about something that is a big process like this.
That is an excellent point. And so you briefly talked about the false accreditation page that we have on our website that lists any organization that we are aware of that may be falsely stating or overstating their accreditation and haven't taken the appropriate steps. So you walk our listeners through kind of the process of once we are notified or once we discover a false claim of accreditation, what steps do we take? And then what are the steps for the laboratory?
We reach out to them and I let them know that there's some problems and I say, okay, please take care of this. And depending on how it goes, like I sometimes send a very formal notification that has like, okay, you must resolve this within this date. If I see it's just out of date, I usually go a little lighter on my notification and say, hey, I noticed this is out of date, but this is a problem. Please take care of this. And if I get a good response and I don't need to say, okay, you have 7 days to do this, unless they don't do it within the 7 days. And then I say, listen, you're supposed to do this within 7 days. I need to do it like right away. Because a lot of times when you're communicating with people about those kind of misstatements that are innocent, they feel that you're threatening them by coming out hot with the like, here's the consequence if you don't do this. And it's like, we don't really want that. If we don't have to be threatening, we don't really want to be threatening, especially if it's a misunderstanding. But ultimately, we just want resolution. We want them to do the right thing. They do the right thing, great. We let them know it's resolved. If they don't do the right thing, they go on the false claims site. And I will say that is not the end of the problems for a laboratory that does that. Let's go with that example I mentioned earlier, where somebody's desperate to get accredited. They make a false claim on their website. They say all the right things, ultimately don't do it because maybe that bid's coming up soon and they need it. They just need a little longer so that they can get through this and they'll do it afterward. Of course, they're not going to say that to me, but let's say that's the scenario. It's important we take care of it and list them on there on the directory. But it's also a situation where like, okay, if this is the kind of person that would do this, we don't want them in the program at all. So we are inclined to not give any services to a laboratory that acts that way. So if they're going to make false claims, they should look elsewhere for accreditation services. We do not need those kind of laboratories bringing our program down. So it's not simply a matter of being listed on the false claims site for a while. There could be other concerns that laboratory has, like not even being a customer at all of ours, if that's something they want to do. Maybe it wasn't their intent in the first place. Maybe their intent was just to pretend to be certified or accredited or whatever wording they thought they needed to use to get through a certain time period, which obviously is not acceptable.
Normally, most people take care of it right away. Like in everything that I've been dealing with, there's a few instances I can think of where they were on that false claims page for a while, as I'm the one that updates that page. So I'm like, man, we still have something there. But what's the farthest? Because you've been here way long with AASHTO way longer than I have. That sounded like a dig, and I didn't mean it that way. But you've been to AASHTO, been with them. So what's
Yes,
the
I am old. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. Is people take care of it ultimately. Like if you look at the false claims of accreditation page, there are no false claims of accreditation right now because people take care of them. They don't want when somebody searches for their name on the internet, they do not want that to come up in one of the hits. Is they're listed under our false claims. So yeah, usually people take care of it right away or they just kind of like fade away. But yeah, I mean, like in the case of our website, just the lack of false claims kind of tells you that people take care of it.
in the false claims policy, some of the examples that we have listed of like what is not acceptable are for acceptable wording. I think we'll share because those are the most common we
Yeah.
have. An example is your organization is recognized by the AASHTO accreditation program. That is not an accurate statement. Another example is that your laboratory is AASHTO resource accredited. Also, not true. It's AASHTO accreditation, not AASHTO resource accreditation. And I think I mentioned earlier that our technicians are AASHTO certified. Also false. And our asphalt is, or product or material, is AASHTO certified?
Let me talk about that one for a second, because I do get questions
Mm-hmm.
all the time from manufacturers about how to get AASHTO certified or some AASHTO branding on their products.
Mm-hmm.
That is not something AASHTO does. It's not something AASHTO Resource does. It's not something anyone else at AASHTO does. They're not AASHTO certified anything. There's a NetPep program that exists, a National Transportation Product Evaluation Program. That program does not certify products either. They have processes, and we have a multi-episode series on what NetPep does that you can check out if you're interested in learning more about that program. But they also don't allow you to slap an AASHTO certification on your products. So like that's just not something AASHTO does. So it's really important that people don't try to say that. Like that would be a big problem, because that implies that we have somehow approved these products to be used by DOTs or by Federal Highway Administration or by somebody else, and we just don't do that.
If our listeners are thinking, well, I thought there was something like that, they were probably thinking about a program that NetPep does, and that they should go to and search for more information on that, because that you're correct. There is no certified products, but there is a list of evaluated products or something.
Evaluated products,
there
correct.
there is a list of products, but they are not certified. So again, some people may be listening to this and like, you're getting into the weeds about what this word means, because doesn't evaluated and certified mean the same thing? No, they do not. So again, I'll encourage you to listen to the terminology episode that we had when we go into those details a little bit more. But if you're thinking that you thought there was a list of some products, there is, but it's not what we're talking about here. So just be aware of that. And then the last example that we have in the policy is tricky. And I think I want you to get into a little bit more details about this, Brian, that our laboratories are AASHTO accredited. Now that seems like that's what we've been talking about. It's saying that our laboratories are AASHTO accredited. Why is that in a list of unacceptable statements?
Many of our customers operate in different places. They might have multiple facilities where they do perform testing. They might have site facilities where they perform testing, or project facilities where they perform testing. AASHTO accreditation is site specific. If you go to the directory, you'll see the address of that laboratory, and that is the only one that is AASHTO accredited. So if you say vaguely our laboratories are AASHTO accredited, that may or may not be true. If you are a third-party testing agency, that is probably not true. You probably need to be more specific about which locations are accredited. However, you may have one facility and not do any testing outside of that facility. And if you said our laboratory is AASHTO accredited and you got one lab and that's where it is and everything matches up, that is not a false claim. So if that's your situation and you're worried, don't worry. But if it's not your situation, you need to fix that. So one way you can do it is you can say, a lot of laboratories, they have a page that has all of their locations, and you might on your front page say, several of our laboratories are AASHTO accredited. Go to our locations page to see which ones are, and then you can denote which ones are and which ones aren't there if you want to do it that way. Or you could link directly to our directory and say, several of our laboratories are AASHTO accredited. Please go to the AASHTO website to see, what we're accredited for, or something like that. That's a good way to do it. Then you don't have to worry about it, because that's going to be, that's going to be our website for the foreseeable future. So unless that changes, I'm not saying it's impossible, but if that ever changes, you'll find out and you can update it then. But that way you don't have to mess around with like, oh, they were suspended or they changed their scope of accreditation, or we dropped this location or we moved this other location. It makes it a little easier. So there are easier solutions.
And I think if you are submitting a bid for a project or doing something like that, we do have on our directory the ability for you to bookmark a page for your laboratory's accreditation. So there's a direct, unique link that you can send, or you can put on your website, or you could put in your email signature line saying that our lab is accredited, and have a link right to it. So you can do that, and that I do suggest people do that if that's helpful to them, right? To just So they don't have to search. Here it is. Here's the link. Here's it. And it's the correct, and again, updated every half hour to an hour. So that is important. But yeah, I think some people get very confused about how, well, like, we have one lab that's accredited. Well, okay, yeah, but you have 20 labs in your in your company and only one of them's accredited. So you can't make the claim that all of your laboratories are accredited, or be vague and say, we have an AASHTO accredited laboratory, but then not say which one, right? Because you can't infer or imply that it extends farther, the scope of accreditation extends farther than it does. So anything else before we move on to the topic adjacent of publicizing your accreditation?
The last thing I want to point out is when I see these pages that include the vague false claims that are probably written by a marketing person that doesn't really understand the details, is they often will throw the kitchen sink at the website and throw every logo of every company they know that is loosely affiliated or used by that company. And I would recommend that people do not do that. So that leads to other false claims, right? So you may claim to have some affiliation with a county government office or a certification program of technicians. I've seen that plenty of times where they say our technicians are all certified. That's probably unlikely. The other situation that we see is they'll say we are CCRL certified, or they'll throw CCRL's logo on their website. They'll throw AASHTO's logo on their website, or the old, maybe even an old AMRL logo on the website. If it's really, then that's when I really think that they're out of date. These kind of things can be a problem. We're not going to make them fix every single one. Like I've seen ones that'll have like we're certified by the county, and it's like, well, your county doesn't do that to my knowledge. But I'm not really going to get into the details with them on that because I don't, that's between them and the county at that point. But I do store it away in my head and think, okay, they've got some issues beyond what we're talking about that they should really take care of. So anyway, I would just caution people away from making any of those kind of claims about any organization,
Mhm.
not just AASHTO accreditation. And that does cast you in a negative light from an integrity perspective. So it's important you get it right.
Yeah, and I think that segues kind of nicely into how to publicize your accreditation, because there is an AASHTO accredited logo for laboratories who are AASHTO accredited to use. And so your promotion of your AASHTO accreditation should only really include that AASHTO accredited logo, not the AASHTO resource logo, not the AASHTO logo, also not the CCRL logo, right? So like, well, you may get assessments or proficiency samples from AASHTO Resource or CCRL, putting their logos on your website or on your promotional material is not stating actually anything, right? Like that is not the appropriate use of those logos. But if you are AASHTO accredited, then you use the AASHTO accredited logo. So when laboratories are newly accredited, we do send them the logos that they can use for that, I believe, or they can request them. And you can request them at any time. If you're updating your promotional materials, you can request, and we will send you the appropriate logos to use. And I believe a link to the policy so you know that you're not misusing those, and so we can help ensure that. So I think that that is good. But why do we care so much about how people use our logo and how they publicize their accreditation, Brian?
Like you said earlier, the words matter, terminology matters. Make sure that everybody understands what's going on, but also that as far as the logo is concerned, there are implications that come with that we need to preserve. The AASHTO accreditation seal or logo that you mentioned is really important to us, and it can only be used by AASHTO accredited laboratories for the purposes that it's intended for. Any other misuse of it could create confusion. And I think that this is the second part of our conversation is like using those logos on things that are not appropriate. So we did get a request recently that I'll specifically talk about. I won't mention who it was, but somebody asked us about, it was an innocent question about use of our logo on apparel. They had their own apparel that they wanted to order, and they wanted to use the AASHTO or AASHTO accreditation logo to say thank you to their technicians for doing such a great job with the assessment. Now, that sounds innocent enough, right? And it sounds like a nice thing to do. However, one concern that we had with that is, does that then down the line sound like those technicians are certified, or that there is some other implication of qualification or recognition through AASHTO or the AASHTO Accreditation Program or AASHTO resource on those technicians for doing whatever they did? Or does that mean that they are certified because they, quote, passed the assessment, which is not a thing? And I know we hear that a lot, is that we passed the assessment, it's not a pass fail. But we want to make sure that there isn't confusion about that. So it's important that we control the use of those logos, especially the AASHTO accreditation logo, so it's not misused. And even in our policy, we say, it can be used in these certain instances, but if you deviate from those instances that are specified on our website, or on our policy, you need to reach out to us and ask for permission, which this person did, to their credit. So
Mhm.
I think this person did all the right things, and the answer was no, and they accepted, and that's good. But we're sharing that information with you on the podcast because others might have those similar questions. So like that's what I love about having this platform, is that we can get those questions, and we can talk about it, and it goes to not just that person, but anybody else who has similar questions.
I love the thought, right, of the thought process behind, oh, they quote unquote survived the assessment, and like, we want to recognize that. And I think that's a great intent from an employee engagement and appreciation standpoint. However, that's not the appropriate way with the logo from an AASHTO accredited logo shirt. I will say our staff, AASHTO Resource and AASHTO staff, may have shirts with variations of our logos on it, but that is the extent. We don't really offer anything else with the AASHTO accredited logo. Now, we have promotional materials that we'll hand out at trade shows, or when we go to the AASHTO Resource Technical Exchange, we'll have branded things on it, but that's the AASHTO Resource logo and not the AASHTO accredited logo. So I think we are fairly protective over that logo, but again, we don't want to imply anything, and we don't want others to infer things based on the use of that logo in non-traditional ways.
Let's get into the weeds. What are the three types of logos we have, just for clarification, of the AASHTO accreditation related logos that one may have seen?
So you may see the AASHTO accredited logo, which is a fun little check mark A looking thing with the words AASHTO and accredited beneath it. And that logo is for AASHTO accredited laboratories to use in promotion of their laboratory's accreditation, right? So you can put that on your promotional materials, on your website, on your test reports, if that covers the scope of your accreditation. Again, gets into the weeds a little bit about what you're actually accredited for and whatnot. But then there's also the AASHTO Accreditation Program logo, which has a similar little logo icon, but then has the words AASHTO Accreditation Program. And that is what we will use internally to identify the AASHTO accreditation program. We'll use it in social media, and we'll promote the AASHTO accreditation program with that logo. And then there is just the brand mark, right? So there's no text below it. It is just the icon or graphic of that yellow and red check mark A scenario. And again, we will use that, AASHTO will use that in promotion of the program. But the only icon or logo that outside agencies or organizations should be using is the AASHTO accredited logo
When appropriate.
when appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the brand mark for our apparel
Hmm.
because I think it looks weird when you have all the little text, like especially when it's really tiny and you can't read it anyway. I don't think that's great. So that's typically where it gets used, is on clothing. That's not to say that we would never be in a situation where we give out items that have our logo on it, but the AASHTO accredited one will never be used in an inappropriate way. Like that's one that is a protected logo. So it is possible that at some point, like if you went to some, I mean, we don't do this now at the technical exchange, but we've talked about, oh, maybe we should have shirts at the technical exchange that we give away. and they have the AASHTO resource logo on them or something like that. And, that's appropriate. And I also like using the logo for the event. And I think coupled with that, it's clear that you're not making any implication other than this person went to this thing that we put on and enjoyed it enough to wear the shirt, or just has a shirt that they like to wear when they're doing yard work or something, like I do with some of my shirts that I have from different events. And that's fine. There's no concern about an implication of a qualification or certification or accreditation or any of those other things.
Yeah, I think to some people from the outside, they may say we're getting into the weeds a little bit on this and that we are too protective or care too much or, splitting hairs about, the use of certification or accreditation or something like that. And I think the point really is that the word, like the words matter. We've said that a lot this episode, but like there is meaning to what those words mean. There's definitions to what accreditation is and how we define accreditation and how the world defines accreditation and certification. And those mean things. So we have to use the words appropriately because we don't want to have an instance where someone's saying that they are AASHTO certified, they're technicians, and then that gives someone an advantage or they do something and then something bad happens, right? And then a mistake mistakes happen. Like comes back to public safety, like the infrastructure and the projects that our customers work on are really big deals and they do play a role in public safety. And, we don't want our name going farther saying, oh, well, they said they were AASHTO certified, so it should have been okay. It's like, that's not what we do. So, you know what I mean? So I think there's a larger scale to that than some people may see at the surface.
Yeah, and I don't think anything you said would surprise anyone who's been working with us for a while. I mean, we reside in the weeds. We are there. If you see the weeds and you look at them, there we are. Talking about terminology, talking about the logos, talking about all these specific details, because it's important to us. And it's good that we exist to care about that thing so you can and like everybody exists to care about their thing that they're involved in, right? And that's how systems work. Like it's important to have those people that care about them. When they don't care about them, then things go awry, and then you have non-optimal situations happening. So be glad that we are here to care about those things and to live in the weeds, so that you don't necessarily have to. You can see them, like we'll tell you about what's going on in the weeds, but you don't have to live there with us all the time. It's okay.
I just have a picture of us like in a swamp with like tall, cattails or something and just like hiding out in the
Yeah, that's
weeds.
where we are.
Yeah,
You'll find us right there.
that is totally what I just have a feel like in hunting gear trying to hide or something is what
Yep.
my mind immediately went to. But is there any other things that we missed that you want to make sure that we get across? Any other points you
No,
want to talk
I
about?
think we belabored these points pretty well. And if you made it through this, congratulations.
Yes.
I salute you.
Yes, if you have any questions about how you're using the AASHTO accredited logo or any questions if you're doing it right or you're just like, I don't want to get in trouble, can you make sure that we are doing this right? Feel free to send your promotional materials and maybe you can send them directly to me at kswanson@ashtoresource.org. But even your quality analyst will be able to be like, oh, yep, that looks right. Like we'll do a quick glance over like, oh no, that wording is wrong. If you want your marketing department to call me to make sure that they are doing everything right, I speak marketing, so I can translate for them if they have any questions about what our policy actually is.
So you have a separate batch of weeds that you reside in
I do.
related to marketing. Okay, that's good
Communications,
to know.
yeah. I have a whole nother set of weeds, a whole other swamp of communication and marketing. And then I have, the technical construction materials side of my brain. Very much a swamp, I will say.
Good to know. So keep that in mind. If you have questions, reach out to Kim. And as always, we have this email address, podcast@ashtoresource.org. If you want to give us feedback about our episodes or give us an idea, or if you want to be a guest and you have something you want to talk about, let us know.
Thanks for listening to AASHTO Resource Q&A. If you'd like to be a guest or just submit a question, send us an email at podcast@ashtoresource.org or call Brian at 240 436-4820. For other news and related content, check out AASHTO Resources' social media accounts or go to ashtoresource.org.